Thank you for coming very much today to what I suspect will be a made-for-television event.
That was my line.
I know, just outside. ATYP's new home, the Rebel Theatre, is very proud to be on Gadigal land, a land obviously rich with tens of thousands of years of its own history. So we pay our respects to elders past, spirits of the ancestors that looked after this place for so long, and elders present who do so much work in our community, and all our First Nations brothers and sisters. To give some context for ATYP here, we just opened this beautiful venue a week ago, and obviously it's been developed with the support of the New South Wales government through Create New South Wales, which we're so grateful. But the federal government, the Australia Council, defunded ATYP as of this year, and what was so interesting about that was when we asked them, as you do, for the reasons why we were defunded, they couldn't give us any. They said there was nothing wrong with your application, you unfortunately were unfunded excellence and there was not enough money to go around, which we think is a perfect kind of example as to why we are in crisis at the moment with the arts. If we have a scenario where our flagship companies, like ours, that can occupy a space like this for young people to engage them in arts experiences, cannot secure some federal investment to make that happen, then what is the future of our industry and the way we engage young people in our activities? So it's ATYP's very great pleasure to partner with the Create Centre and Michael and Robin on this event today. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Fraser. And thanks to you all for coming. My name, as Fraser mentioned, is Professor Michael Anderson. I'm Professor of Arts and Creativity Education at the University of Sydney and co-director with Professor Robin Ewing of the Centre. Tonight, I think, even though we are small in number, we are strong in spirit in the arts and education. We're used to that kind of approach. Yeah. The rabble, that was actually real noise for those listening to the recording. We really want to kind of start to bring to the fore some of the issues that are happening in arts and arts education to recognise that we are actually in the midst of a systematic defunding and de-resourcing of what's going on of arts and arts education. And the fact that we can't even get a pulse out of this in the election campaign is, to us and to many, I presume many of our panellists, something which is really problematic. And so what we want to do tonight is not so much dwell on the kind of crisis, although we probably will do a little bit of that, but actually talk about how we can unify, how we can galvanise, how we can think about what's next. How do we raise the agenda? How do we support those who are in arts and arts education and arts and health and wellbeing to make a difference in their communities? Because we know from the unequivocal research that the arts make a difference. They make a difference in education, they make a difference in our communities, they make a difference in health and wellbeing, and yet we seem to have policymakers and some politicians who don't really have a sense that that's the case. And so we want to broaden tonight the discussion just from bums on seats and kind of theatrical performances and art galleries and all of that, even though they play a critical role in what happens in our society and in our culture, to talk about the really strong ways that arts can make a difference in our schools, in our hospitals, in our communities, in our youth justice centres, in our jails. We want to talk about how we might start to get that discussion going. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions to get our panel fired up and in the zone, hopefully. And then I'd love to hear questions from you. I'd love to hear the kinds of questions that are on your minds about what we might do and how we might do it better to prosecute, I suppose, the wealth that we know is in arts education. And so without any further ado, I'm going to just introduce the panel. Now, you should have in your hands, and if you're watching the recording, you'll have a link to the bios of these fantastic people. So I'm not going to kind of introduce them in depth, but I do want to kind of recognise that they've given up their time tonight to talk about something that they're really passionate about. So we have a guest who will be with us momentarily. He's getting off a train from Picton, and we all know what the what the trains are like at the moment. So he'll be with us soon. He's going to be rushed in. And Neville Williams-Boney will be with us in a minute. We have Jane Caro, Penelope Benton, Diya Goswami, Laura Jade Hines, and what I'm going to get them to do is, in this first question, I'm going to get them to introduce themselves and explain how the arts has made a difference in the work that they do or create with their communities. I'm going to start with you, Jane.
Okay. Well, the arts have made a difference to me all my life. You can't live and not interact with the arts. Every time you turn on the television, watch a film, draw a picture, dance, sing, and of course I'm a writer, I write books. I've got a novel out at the moment, and indeed if I'm successful in my Senate run, which is a long shot, which means you should all vote for me, and don't tell me you're not in my electorate. If you're in New South Wales, you're in my electorate. But if I get into the Senate, I think I'll be the only published novelist. There's plenty of people who've written books in the Senate. Not so many people may have read them. But I will be the only published novelist in the Parliament, I believe. I'm not sure if that's ever, but certainly at the moment. So, I guess I always hesitate to call myself an artist. I don't know why. I have a feeling that it's a higher calling, and not for the likes of me to aspire to. But I suppose a novelist equals an artist. So, yes, and but maybe by my saying that diffidence, it explains something of the problem that the arts have. That in some ways, we've divided the arts up. So we see entertainment, where Netflix series and films and rock concerts and that kind of thing is fun. We love that. But the arts is seen as almost like a kind of medicine you take to improve your mind or to prove your membership of a certain social class. And so that's, I think, one of the problems that we have in this sector, that people don't associate the things they have fun interacting with the arts. They see them as the arts is, and maybe education's got something to answer for here, in that so many kids have suffered, I have to say, learning, and I was on the board of Bell Shakespeare till very recently, so I'm not making aspersions about Shakespeare, but the kind of way kids have had to suffer through things, and they've got a lifelong aversion to whatever they see as that kind of intellectual stuff. And also, we can't dismiss the fact that Australia has a very, very strong and it's persistent streak of anti-intellectualism. This government, I think, is the most anti-intellectual government I've ever seen. And I could use a ruder term, but I'm going to stick to anti-intellectual. It's enough from me.
Thanks, Jane. Penelope, you're on NAVA, which is the National Association for Visual Arts, and you are on the NAAE. Tell us a bit about kind of the broad education kind of perspective that you've been involved in, and how it's made a difference to you.
Sure. Well, first of all, the National Association for the Visual Arts is the national peak body for visual arts, craft and design, established in 1983 as a membership organisation, and the core of our work really is to bring together the many voices across the sector, artists, arts workers and organisations, and really to improve the fundamental conditions of work in our sector. And we do that through advocacy, professional development, and our foundation document, the Code of Practice. My work with the National Advocates for Art Education, which is the NAAE, we're a collective of members, including teachers, academics, and peak bodies, representing all the 5 art forms, and our concerns are with the school curriculum, as well as tertiary education, including university and TAFE. For me, I wouldn't be where I am had I not had big benefits from my own art education. 3-unit art at school. School art was a really big thing in my school. I think I probably disagree with some of the things that Jane said, because I don't think people suffered. Certainly when I was in arts in school, and in getting to the end of my school and thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And fortunately, my mother said, you really seem to enjoy art a lot. Why don't you pursue that? And of course, I went off to establish myself as an artist, and I went to TAFE, I went to university, and then I got into arts administration, and I did arts business. So I've got, lots of bits of paper, and everybody, of course, being an artist and an arts worker means that everybody in my life are artists or arts workers, all of my friends and colleagues. And then extended in my family, everybody has some engagement with the arts at some level, and that might be as practitioners themselves, or they go to galleries. Sometimes they'll read about art in the paper. My granny sends me clippings that she's cut out of the Gosford newspaper of things that she thinks that I might be interested in, and posts them to me in the mail. My cousins are in dance, and of course everybody watches Netflix or listens to music. It's so deep, and of course all of our research shows, and a lot of information came out. About 73% of Australians engaged or turned to the arts in times of crisis. I think that as people across the country, there is a deep recognition that arts are important to us, and yes, it does get merged with entertainment, and I don't know if that's necessarily a problem. Where it is a problem, I think, is where our government worry. I think they worry about the elitist and the high arts and the entertainment, and I guess that's what we've seen with the Rise Fund, is this incorporating and stripping money out of the Australia Council, so they are so debilitated that they can't fund organisations like this one and NAVA actually, because our government have redirected funds to support big commercial enterprise, including Lego. And I love Lego as much as the next person, but it is in a different category, and I think the merging of those types of categories is dangerous for independent work.
I think the point you make is a fantastic one, that and it comes out of some research that Robin and I were doing a few years ago, which is when we talk to community members, we said, are you involved in the arts? And they'd often say, no, we're not involved in the arts. And we'd say, well, what did you do on the weekend? They said, we went to a dance festival in our community, and we went to a show, and it's almost like the arts has a kind of an image problem, that we don't see the kind of things that we do as every part of our lives as arts infused. And I think that's a fantastic kind of point. Diya, I want to come to you now, because you're a living, breathing product of this place, this wonderful place, and we're so thankful that we're able to host this today here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're up to now, and how the arts has impacted you? And I'd love you to hit the back wall when you do that with your magnificent voice.
Sure. Well, I'm a first year student at university at the moment, but all through high school and in my younger years, just having access to theatre activities and performing arts initiatives, and having access to a couple really awesome dedicated teachers who would really push me in the arts, and initiatives such as with the Department of Education, their arts unit program, or the amazing ATYP. It's just a place where I've always been able to feel at home. And I think we talk a lot about the cathartic element of art, right? Where as an adolescent, you have all these emotions, and sometimes you don't know where to put them, but then coming and finding a monologue and resonating with something, or even just talking to someone who you'd never talk to about a scene in a Shakespeare play, or even a scene in a movie, that kind of thing really helped me kind of navigate the social jungle of high school, you could call it, I think. And I don't know where I'd be today without the arts and arts education. I think it's given me a lot of confidence in communication. It's given me empathy, which ultimately, helps with collaborating and teamwork. And no matter what industry a young person ends up in, those skills will be important. I remember in high school, a lot of my friends would say, well, I'm not going to end up in the arts. Why should I have to study Shakespeare? Why should I have to do a drama class? And then you'd see them 20 seconds later, really enjoying just letting loose and connecting with someone in a different way, or kind of accessing a different part of themselves. So
Yeah, and I think you make a fantastic point, Diya, about the ecosystem of the arts. It's not just about education or places like ATYP. There's really complex interactions between kind of arts companies, arts research, schools. So there's and I don't know that's often recognised in the kind of development that it offers young people. And you're doing economics and philosophy.
yeah.
So is that a fail for the arts, that you haven't gone into the arts, or is that what does that mean for you? Like, how is it helping you right now?
Actually, weirdly, I mean, theatre is still my passion and it's what I want to end up in. But weirdly, in my very introductory studies of economics, I found that sometimes being able to pull a story from 1,000 rows of data is almost more important than understanding what each individual data input means or the formulas needed to get there. And because at the end of the day, I can't chuck an Excel spreadsheet at someone, right? I have to put it into a story, and that's where the exchanges of ideas happen. That's how things work in this world. Like, we need to talk and we need to connect with people, no matter what industry it is. It's always a human one, I think, and I think the arts did a great job for me in facilitating that empathy and storytelling skill.
I think you should talk to Jane. You should run for the Senate next. Fantastic. So I want to now move to you, Laura, because I think of all the panellists, you have a kind of I want to say the quirkiest,
Thanks.
but one of the most interesting applications of the arts in what you're doing. And then we'll move to Neville, who's going to be surprised by the question I ask him because he's got no idea what I'm going to ask him. Hey, Neville. So, Laura, tell us a bit about the work you're doing and the impact that it's had on you, but the impact that it's having on the community as well.
Sure. So hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name's Laura Jade, and my art practice, sort of started in fine art, in learning how to paint, but I gradually became obsessed with light. And so that came through painting, and I would be, really, really interested in painting portraits and capturing light. But eventually I got so interested in light that I actually studied biology and how light impacts the body, our relationship to light, how light connects us to the universe. And I toyed with the idea of being a scientist as well. And in a similar way to Diya, I was like, facts and figures, maybe that's how I'll make a contribution to the world. But really I was an artist at heart, and so I always saw science through an artistic lens in terms of the narrative and creating connection and empathy to the world and nature. So after sort of doing a bit of the biology thing, I decided maybe museums are the best place for me to connect art and science together and tell stories, to communicate science in an artistic way and to engage audiences. So I did a master's in curation and museum studies, but it was a bit dusty and it didn't quite fulfill my needs. I ended up in a master's of illumination design at UTS, and so there at UTS I did technology, interaction design, and kind of learned how to program and to turn artworks that were, from a painting into interactive artworks that explore the body and use light to communicate data. So one of my artworks, one of the ones that came out of my master's degree at UTS, is a giant brain that lights up with your brain activity. So you wear an EEG headset, it reads the electrical activity of your brain and visualizes that your live dominant frequencies as different colors. So if you're calm and meditative, it'll be blue. If you're anxious or nervous, it might be red. And if you're unfocused and a bit daydreamy, it will be green. And so this artwork was really a synthesis of my interest in biology, science, light, the body, but also an interest in how do we use art to connect to ourselves? How can we visualize our own mind, see it externalized, and have a conversation with it? Because all art is a mirror of who we are, and it's a mirror of society. And so I've been taking this work, Brainlight, it's been in all sorts of strange contexts, unexpected things that I didn't imagine when I made it, that it could go to prisons, that it could go to strange science institutions across the world, that it would be commissioned by a Romanian neuroscientist to communicate to his students, that I would be teaching art and science workshops to primary school students that teach them about emotional regulation and control, because the artwork actually it's a biofeedback system, and it's kind of taking something that's gone from a psychology clinical setting into a creative and playful space where children or adults can learn about their own mind and their own brain and their own sort of inner world, and share that experience with others, because they become the artwork and everyone around them gets to kind of view their inner landscape. So it is a spectacle as well. And the impacts that I've seen of my work, and what keeps me going is that not many artists get to actually see someone having an emotional reaction to their own artwork. Maybe if you're a musician or you're in the theatre, you get to read the audience and you do feel it. But for most visual artists, you put your artwork in a gallery and you sort of like hope for the best. You don't get that immediate feedback. Maybe you get a review or something, or just word of mouth. But for me, the pleasure of it is that I facilitate it with someone, and so it becomes a relationship, sort of triangulation between me, the person participating in the artwork, and I get to see literally how it's affecting their mind because it's visualized. And so that's been a very powerful place for me to feel like I can have an impact on the way people view themselves as well, because I can guide them through the experience. And inevitably we end up having very interesting, deep conversations about who they are, what matters to them, and possibilities for the future. One of the most universal reactions to the work Brain Light, that's what it's called, is people say, imagine if we did this with it, or imagine if what if we did this, or and so the work actually shows the way art makes us see possibilities, new potentials. It opens our minds to new ideas.
It's such a fascinating... Stanislavski talked about the magic what if. What if we did this? What if we did that? And I think in a way this space is a what if space. What if we did things differently in the arts? And Neville, I'm going to throw to you because... and thank you for getting off that train from Picton.
That's okay.
Now, Neville, you're a botanist. You work in botany. You work in dance. You work in all...
Zookeeping, yeah.
Yeah, all different ways. Tell us a bit about what the arts means to you and the people that you work with, and why you are kind of immersed in the arts as you are.
First of all, my name is Neville Williams-Boney. I'm a Wiradjuri and Waywam man from a town called Wagga Wagga, and I would personally just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands, the Eora people. Give us thanks for looking after land for thousands of years so we can be here to enjoy them, and then now it's up to us to make sure those animals, plants, air, water are still here for our future generations to care for and to actually see them. So the art is, for me, I didn't really start in art. I was like a footballer head, nothing, didn't think of dance like nothing, so should have been there when I told my dad that I was like quitting football and doing dance. Oh, no. And then, but now I'm like kind of the most successful out of all my siblings, so he's actually kind of proud of that now. So I was like, he tells everyone about it now, but before he wouldn't have. But he also talked about that what if I stayed in football. So the arts, to me, through art I found my culture. So I graduated from Neza Dance College in 2018. Before 2015 I knew nothing about my own culture and about Aboriginal culture in general, and I barely knew anything. And then through dance is how I learnt all the stories and all the knowledge that I've gotten through my dance training at Neza Dance College. And so I guess for me, I kind of take what I've learnt from my cultural background and from being on this country for tens of thousands of years, and then through dance, I get to teach kids. But that's where I was today, actually teaching kids out in Picton about ochre and about their culture and the proudness I feel when they're dancing and they're learning and taking it all in. And I use that kind of art into all of my endeavors. So when I'm at a zookeeping, I teach kids how to dance, what to do if you get bitten by a snake and what to do. And they do the dance to remember what to do if you get bitten by a snake, which is very helpful. And then I learn stories about the animals, and I teach them about the animals and what we know through, because my people, we were botanists, we were astronomers, we were zoologists, we were everything. And then I literally had this conversation with the Uber driver on the way here. I was like, why can't I be that same thing? Like, why can't I go through do zookeeping and then also do dance on the side, and also go do botany, and then also study and work with scientists about life on rocks and from asteroids hitting them, and doing dance about that, and be a paleontologist about rocks and learning about megafauna. Like, why can't I? Maybe it's not about the what if, it's like, why can't you?
Yeah.
And it's funny that you should mention light, which is really cool, because up in Yungle country, you should probably go talk to them up, because they have a whole story about Bunba, the butterfly that spread lights to everywhere and gathered the light from the stars, and then sent it, and the tree catches it and puts it out. Like, it's really cool. They talk about light, and through that light, we learn all those dances, and that's how we learn. Like, we learn for thousands of years. We learn stories and we learn information through dance, through song, through story. Just like probably reiterating everyone's point here, that through art, it's easier to remember a meaning and empathy, and learn like the true value of something rather than facts and figures. Like, you forget that suddenly. Like, how many of you guys could remember a nursery or a storybook from when you're young, or a nursery rhyme or a melody when you're younger? Like, studies have shown this over and over again, that art works, but people just don't make that connection.
And Diya was actually saying something similar about spreadsheets, believe it or not. That the numbers don't talk, but stories do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting theme that's emerging. Now, I'm going to ask the audience to throw in questions in a second, but my second question to the panel is, with so many competing calls on government funds, why should the arts, including arts education, get public support? And if we think they should, how can we make that happen? I might start with Diya. You're doing economics, what, we've got kind of limited resources. Why do the arts deserve some of those resources? And if they do, how can we change the conversation?
I think it comes back to the idea that I remember in high school, a lot of people would say the arts is it's just one industry, and how can arts education kind of make us prepared for the real world? I heard that a lot. But then when we come back to the idea of empathy and being able to communicate, having arts education from a young age teaches you those skills that I think will be transferable to any career or any industry. So if the argument is that we shouldn't provide arts support because it'll only affect one industry, we should scrap that, because really it'll just make a richer, better workplace. I think it'll make for better teamwork, make for more empathetic workplaces as well. And when it comes back to what we can do, I always think of teachers. I think the whole reason why I'm so involved in arts and why I have come to understand how to use my voice and that I have a voice, it's because of those few teachers who really pushed me and extended my learning beyond the curriculum, and extended those in-class conversations. And when we take away funding from the arts and those English teachers and drama teachers, we're taking away their capacity, or they have more stresses so that they can't deliver that to the full possibility.
Yeah. So Jane, you've been a long time advocate for public education. Thinking about that question and Diya's comments, what do you think we should be doing in terms of the nexus between arts education and the arts?
Yeah, look, I think we've got quite a deep problem right across society, which is that, first of all, we've allowed governments to, and it was in your question, in fact, to convince us all that we're part of a kind of scarcity mentality, that in fact there's not enough to go around. That's actually bullshit. There is plenty to go around. We live at one of the most rich times in history, and we're one of the most prosperous countries in history. We have 4 million people living in poverty. Nevertheless, we have enough money. What we do not have is governments with the will to spend that money where it would actually make a real difference to people's lives. I've been puzzling over this for quite a long time. Why? Because what we tend to do in these panels is we put forward arguments that are fantastic arguments, but all true. That, you know, if you've got half a brain and half a heart, you nod and you go, yeah, absolutely. And still nothing changes. And so I think we've got to stop believing, and I worked this out when I started getting vocal about public education, because when I first started 20 odd years ago, I thought, I'll just tell everyone the facts about the whole and everyone going, oh gosh, how could we have been so stupid? Of course we must give public schools more money. How stupid of us. Why didn't we think about it? It never works. It hasn't worked. And I realised that in fact good cases are not the point. You have to start to work out what is the barrier, what is stopping your good case getting through to the people who have the power to give you what you need to do the great things that you could do, and which would, I mean, one of the things the arts provides, which we're really short of in this world at the moment, is joy. And we discount joy. In fact, I think our governments hate joy. I think they're really kind of worried about a society that has any joy. They really want us all to be very exhausted, really feeling secure in our work, so that we work really long hours for no pay, on top of the little bit of pay we get, that we need to feel frightened all the time that if we don't grab on to everything we can get, and we see this in the idea of you've got to send your kid to the most expensive private school you can afford. The idea behind that is if I don't do that, my kid will get left behind. So it is this hierarchy where everybody's fighting to make sure they're not at the bottom of the hierarchy. And that's what governments have done. I keep thinking about, and also they've become all this stuff about productivity commissions and data and all those hard words, which are all about the only purpose in life here is to be a little kind of productivity engine, you know, who produces things. Our kids are all meant to be being educated to get jobs. It's all about workers, jobs, jobs, jobs. I go to Dickens, I go to Hard Times, I go to Mr. Gradgrind, whose view of the world was that. And that has been part of our political way of looking at the world for as long as anyone can remember. And so what we need to start doing is thinking, how do we make people understand that they are being cheated and conned by our governments into thinking there's not enough to go around?
So is that the barrier that you talk of? That there's a public perception that's the barrier, or is it more than that?
Well, what we've done is we've really decided that we, governments, people in power, big business, a lot of the media, that the most effective way to keep a population doing what you want them to do, which is basically keep them in power, is to make them afraid. So they've leveraged fear. And so we have a society where everyone's afraid. And so people aren't joining together. Remember, the enemy is the collective. Why won't they do anything about climate change? It's a no-brainer. House is burning down. Get the fire extinguisher out. Everyone gather round. Let's try to put the fire out. No, let's pretend there is no fire. Let's pretend the fire isn't there. That's not going to work. The house is going to burn down. Because they're frightened of the collective. Because they've got a view of the world where there's a few people at the top and they want to hang on to everything that... I know, I'm a radical. It's a terrible thing. They want to hold on to what they've got at the top, and the only way they can do that is to convince everybody that they've got to keep fighting to get up as high as they can towards the top themselves.
Yeah. So Penelope, do you think that's right, given your kind of front row seat in kind of looking at arts education? And if it is right, is Jane's analysis the way to go? Do you think we have to be speaking to that fear? Or is there...
Well, we fight that fear. We don't feed it. We actually say it's a bullshit. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
Totally. I'm sure you saw me nodding furiously. I 100% agree with everything you just said, Jane. Yes, there absolutely there is a deep fear. I don't think we need to work with the fear. What I guess picking up on some of the points that you've just made, and I guess some of the research that we all have is that I was reading a good stat, which I will just share with you now, is, on analysis of Australian census data in 2011, it estimated that almost 124,000 people were employed overall in the arts as their main job, including full-time and part-time workers. And on average, arts employment had been growing at around 2.6 annually since 1996, which is faster than the growth in employment overall, which was 1.9. Now, just after that census, the government stripped out all of the questions that relate to arts as a practice, and now if you tick the box, it's completely hidden, and you're instead answering questions about what is your primary income source. So there's actually no clear, accurate data right now as to how many artists we have in Australia and what the impact of that is financially on their lives. And so, I believe that the government have done that because they've gone, oh goodness, this is really big. People have been creative with their minds and thinking, and there's resistance. Shut that down. I think mostly, I guess in my position is just an awareness I'm sharing with Jane, is that an awareness of what the problem is. And it is, I think what's needed is much bigger than any one individual can possibly do, and it is about the collective, and it is about not just artists and arts workers communicating and advocating for change, but it's everybody. It's everybody who engages with music, comes to shows, their family and friends, but everybody making the choice when comes election time to consider what each of the candidates and what are the parties putting up and what is their commitment to the arts. And you said in the opening that there has been no commitments from any of the parties about what their arts policies might be or investment in the arts. But we need to start making noise about that as being important to us, and everybody can write letters to their local candidates or talk to them when they go and do everybody's out right now doing, being out there and about, but candidates and the parties need to know from the Australian people that this is important to us, and the only way they're going to hear that is if we tell them. And I think there's not enough of us because we're tired and exhausted, but making that, it doesn't need to be long, but I think it's really important that everybody does that. And, you can handwrite a note.
Yeah, and Laura, I think kind of your example is so interesting because we hear so much about, we're going to make more things here, we're going to have industry here, and yet the kinds of innovation that you've managed in your projects have been incredibly influential internationally, and yet they don't seem to get the kind of profile that making stuff here or, refining minerals but they're really kind of, it's heart and soul arts practice that you've used. I wonder whether there's an argument we should be making about the utility of the kind of work you do, but also the innate need for communities to have access to arts to make them fully human. I don't know how you balance that and what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, our economy is just so focused on getting things out of the ground that we don't, think about all the other needs that we have that make us human, and I think that's sort of something that's very unique to Australia as a society, is that we haven't needed to develop an arts culture or an innovation, in our technological sector, because we've been so focused on the stuff that we dig up. And for me, I think, every child deserves an art-rich curriculum, not because it's fun to make a painting, but because it teaches us how to engage in ways of thinking that, is about resistance. It is about questioning the status quo. It's about designing a life that we want to live and designing a future. The future's far from knowable, but it's very easily inventable. And the only way to invent things is to think of new stuff, and, my artwork in a sense was novel because it combined science, technology and art in a new combination. And that I've spent the last 15 years studying all sorts of things that are actually unrelated to art. You know, I've been doing engineering, I've been doing electronics and science, and I've been studying all those things in order to inform my own art practice and to be a better artist. You know, being an artist is about being a human that's engaged in the world and about imagining a world that we want to live in. And, you know, people have been engaging in science, philosophy, botany, you know, astronomy since time began. Like, we need to stop siloing our humanity into these pockets that aren't talking to each other. You know.
And I think that that's so interesting that we sometimes think of those combinations as novel, and yet First Nations people have been, as Neville was saying so beautifully earlier, have been actually engaging with the whole thing. You know, why can't we? I think is a great first question. But when you're talking about your practice and the way that you teach kids through dance and botany, and you know, and you bring all that together, which reminds me that First Nations people have had such a deep understanding of learning that feels like white fellas are just catching up with.
Well, yeah. Bluntly, yeah. I mean, like, you know, 250 years, white people have been here, you know, and look what's happened already. Koalas are, like, now endangered. We've lost so many animals already, being a zookeeper. So many plants are all endangered also. Native plants are supposed to be here. We're farming, which is... I'm from a country town, so I'm a bit, like, half and half about, but, like, cars aren't supposed to be here, horses, anything with hooves aren't supposed to be here. They're ruining the soil, taking all this water, like, it's ruining the planet, and we all know this. Like, the bushfires just happened, and then all of a sudden it's all been raining this month. Like, you know.
So how do we use the arts to not only prosecute that argument, but how do we convince and influence those who, you know, are making policy and making law to think about it differently, to think about it in the way that you've outlined?
Yeah, I think, like I said, talking with people from other Sydney theatre company of doing teaching artists, like, they need a teaching artist in politician, like, in the government. They need someone to come in that knows how to teach them through art, because it is about that critical thinking. It is about, I think the fear is not us. I think the fear is them, because they fear that they'll lose power if they give it over. You know, cis white straight men's been ruling the world for however long, and they're just ruining it. And so, you know, they're just scared of this art. They're scared of this critical thinking. But with critical thinking comes that compassion, comes that immersive of ideas, and the world that we could have been. Like, if like, you know, when the first British came over, they imagine the world that could have been if we just kind of worked together and kind of had that creative thinking together. We could have evolved the First Nations ideas with British technology into a world that could have been very, very, like, sustainable. Like, just thinking about it is crazy. Like, why couldn't it? And why can't we start now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's hear from the audience. I'd love you to introduce yourself, and if you are running for Parliament, please let us know.
Well, there is someone else.
But yeah, so any questions for our panel? One up the back there we'll start with, and then we'll come over here.
Hi, my name is Shanti, and I'm in education, so I'm a principal. And it's a really interesting thing, you know, when we're talking about why or how things have changed. Because when I first went to university and studied primary education, even then it seemed problematic, you know, when we were doing our drama and music, and people were reviewing the curriculum, and, you know, every iteration of the creative arts syllabus seems to have become more simplified until, you know, there's barely anything there. The thing that I'm wondering about, you know, like Jane, you talked about the, you know, we've got to ask why. You know, Michael, you're talking about strategizing moving forward. It feels like there's a duality in the system. The light side of the system is that people celebrate the arts, they're binging on Netflix, you know, you go to the charts, you're seeing the top records, Australia's Got Talent, Dancing with Anybody and whatever is all really popular.
Still reading books.
And you know all of that. But then the shadow side of it is that it's dying in the classrooms. and that the curriculum is really not honouring the arts. Then you've got the other aspect where today I sat through a STEMpreneur project where we've got Microsoft working with my school. And all the attributes, because we're doing transdisciplinary curriculum at my school, all the attributes of what they considered STEM are exactly the same things that you're talking about here, which are critical thinking, reflection, empathy, problem solving, blah, blah, blah. Is there the possibility that art, and I don't know, I'm going back to a really old quote from the 80s. Remember, pop will eat itself? Remember that? It almost feels like art it has eaten itself on some level. And maybe we need to redefine what art means, because philosophy, the philosophy that drives that, the rich intellectual rigour and investigation that is part of art, these are things that are missing from the education curriculum but are so important for us to honour the arts. So I'm just wondering, is it redefining? Is it being able to work at that collective level where we're not just seeing STEM as a product, we're starting to think bigger than that and see where the connections are, and you future-proof it.
Can I just say something quickly about that? Because what I've watched for the last 30 years is what I call the control freaks taking over. So basically what's happened is everything that is worth anything now, or is seen as being worth anything, has to be able to be measured. It has to have a value. We have to be able to put a number on it. We have to be able to see that it's happened. So what I hear, my daughter's an English teacher. She's doing learning support at the moment, but she's an English teacher by training. And she tells me I could do 3 really creative things in the classroom, or I can do 1 and actually fill in all the forms and report on it and put it in my portfolio and get the powers that be to acknowledge that I've done this one really creative thing. So, but I can't do 3 creative things and do all the, the admin that is now attached to everything that a teacher does in the classroom. And this is to do with the fact that we've lost trust. So we no longer think that a teacher teaching a class will do a good job until she proves otherwise or he proves otherwise. We think, oh no, they're going to do a bad job unless we ride them and make sure that we know every second of the day what they're doing. And art is the exact opposite of that. Art is about letting go of control. It is about doing things for the sheer inventiveness and because they've never been done before. That terrifies the control freaks. And everywhere you look, the Department of Education, the Parliament, it doesn't matter where it is. There's forms to be filled in. It's as if we invented computers and then we decided that they were so clever we ought to turn the whole world into computers.
But do you think there is a space for redefining? Because the fact that...
Yes, but the control freaks won't... The control freaks, they want to define everything down to the narrowest possible definition. And what you're really talking about in terms of redefinition is, in fact, you're almost saying throw off all those...
And future-proof it. Because,
yes.
like, even STEM has limitations. It's focused on a project. There's no future scoping with that.
No. Outcomes, because everybody's obsessed with outcomes. The one thing you can't control.
Any other thoughts on that?
I would probably think of it as like when I was doing arts, when I was in high school, I didn't really do dance and all that kind of stuff. But then after that, going through NASA dance, because we had a holistic view of dancing and all dance. So we learned many different traits. We learned music, we learned yoga, we've learned culture, of course, and then we learned how to write music. And then we also looked at filming and everything like that, like what makes an artist and producing and all that kind of stuff, like full artists. And I think with education, what needs to be done, we're set on having, you're a musician down here, you're an artist here, we're getting like slots and that's your like laneway, where I think what's really good is when you merge everything together and you kind of like, why can't you do a dance about numbers? Like about kids counting to 8, but then more. I know dancers can only count to 8, but we can count more, you know what I mean? And then groups of it, and then, or do a play. Like I literally went on Saturday, we were with Alfred Crucius University, we were at New South Wales Parliament and we had a trial of Lachlan Macquarie. Like literally have lawyers in the room, they're all lawyers, none of them are actors. but they're all like, we had a whole trial on Lachlan Macquarie about what goodies did, what baddies did, and kind of make a decision if he was a good guy or a bad guy based on the book Judging the Macquaries. That was a whole history lesson for the law students, and they got more out of that than any classroom would have. And so that empathy of being that character, and they learned about colonisation, they learned about Aboriginal relations, they learned about the history, they learned about law, they learned about literally everything in that one session where it would have took months of classes with one each session.
So they learned without even knowing they were learning.
100%.
They were
And that's the
enjoying
best
it,
way
that's
to
the best
learn.
way.
Yeah.
You know?
And the irony is that that's the exception rather than the rule. Like, why isn't that the rule? What I don't understand, and it's kind of what Jane's talking about, is we've known.
We've known for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Like Western culture, have known for so long, and we see it in movies, we see it in so many problems, but we just, for some reason, it's not just clicking.
Yeah.
And I think it's honestly because they're scared, and like Robin, someone told them, no, you can't draw.
Yeah.
It's also because teachers are incredibly under-resourced, and
Yeah.
teaching
100%.
in that capacity is enormously exhausting, because I teach science classes to kids where I include creativity and art making in order to teach science concepts. And it's a type of experiential learning where they're literally solving problems with each other, and it's very hands-on, very, very active. And after 3 hours of a class, I am exhausted.
Yeah.
I'm really tired. And so, I've had classroom teachers observe my workshops to, get ideas and like cross-pollinate techniques for teaching different concepts. And I just think if I was doing that type of teaching 5 days a week, I'd fall over.
But imagine if like everyone was doing that.
But
Like,
if it became the norm, if it became something where it was more supported, where there were sessions that kids could move around, for that type of teaching on a regular basis, it would be incredible, because the kids come out just beaming.
That's what Passy Salberg is. He's lobbying for reducing face-to-face time in the classroom, increasing the amount of creative collaboration that teachers can do, that students can do. So more creative free time, less sitting in class,
more play.
Trying to get that through the control freaks. I wish you the very best of luck.
Well, I mean, this is another panel, but that does exist. Like, it's out there, but it's how we get the infrastructure going to make it not the exception. I wonder, Penelope, whether you think that's possible. Is that a vision too grand?
No, I don't think it's a vision too grand. I think it's fabulous. Absolutely possible. And yes, play and experimentation have come up in the review of the Australian curriculum that we shall see soon. I hear it'll come out after the election. But just picking up on some of the discussion is, one of our, we have currently a federal election campaign that we launched a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that we're advocating for is a shift away from outputs to measuring impact. So we're not counting numbers. It shouldn't be about how many bums on seats and and the numbers and that kind of reporting, but a different type of measurement of.
Yeah, right. Let's take our second question.
Yes, hello. I'm Janine Kitson, and I'm standing as an independent in the Bradfield electorate, and that's very important because the Minister for the Arts happens to be Paul Fletcher, and I'm standing against him. Now, one of the things I want to ask you, an open-ended question, is what do you think of how he has performed? And I know what you're going to say. But I want to say there are some things. Ministerial discretion, it's a problem. Commercialisation of art. Defunding, and related to that is the attacks on the ABC, which is a really important source of the arts.
I should say before we answer as a panel that we did invite members of all political parties to join us here this evening, and they're obviously busy, but we do have two representatives.
Studying data.
Yeah, collecting data. What do people think? What's the response to how Paul Fletcher's doing and those other kind of questions?
Do you want to take
Penelope.
first? You haven't said anything. Look, yes. There are big problems with quite a number of the decisions that the government have made in regards to the arts over decades, actually. particularly, what was your first one? Ministerial discretion. So yes, absolutely. And, towards the end of last year, they just added a ministerial discretion to the Australian Research Council grants. Prior to that, of course, what we're seeing with the RISE Fund is, sure, they are absolutely have chucked a lot of money at arts and entertainment throughout this pandemic, but it's what we have issue is that it doesn't seem to, it's not informed by anything. It's not recognising the ecology of the arts and their impact that giving money here will have or not have anywhere else. And so this is why the Australia Council and investing money through that long established program is so important to us, because it recognises the ecology and the impact of where money is put across all the states, across all the different scales of organisations, across independent artists and different communities, so that it reaches artists at all stages of their careers, and not just at the end or at the beginning or the middle, but across, and it's reaching everybody when they need it. And instead, what we've been seeing for too long is just this sort of ad hoc chucking money at things, and the impact is lost, and it's just sort of an immediate bangs all over the place. And they're able to claim that they're giving lots of money, but it hasn't got that impact that we've been talking about.
Do you, as someone in first year university, you've seen what's been going on. You're obviously politically aware. Are you voting for the first time in this federal election?
Yep, first time.
What's on your mind around all of those kind of issues? Like, what are you thinking about all that?
I think I always think about it in connection with education, the Department of Education, with the arts. And I think I wanted to go back really quickly to what Shanti was asking before. I think the reason why arts can kind of suffocate in schools and universities is because of standardized testing. Yep. And that idea that Jane was saying about how we need a 20 out of 20 or a band 6 or something. And I want to just remind everyone of the perspective of a disillusioned student who's just gone through the experience of the HSC. I was frustrated so many times when I'd be conversing in the English classroom about a Doll's House, a play, or a Shakespeare play, and the teachers were going, "That's great," and we were really embarking on new ideas and new perspectives with the class together, but it doesn't hit the couple of criteria that's on a mark sheet in a Nessa markers paper or Nessa markers. And I think it carries over into university as well a little bit.
And do you see that as the issue that is causing some of these problems in terms of the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think it goes back to that idea that we need these straight cut outcomes and numbers, when really the arts is a lot of experimenting and not getting it right the first time, or just trying something new. Whereas something like maths or physics, you kind of know the formulas and you just keep at it. But arts, you can really build something new from something that you've been trying for 10 years.
Yeah.
I think every successful artist that I talk to says they've learnt everything from their failings more than successes. So everything that you and having the space and the time to allow yourself to experiment and fail is the way that we grow more than anything. And I guess when we are stuck with numbers, there's no room for that.
Okay, Neville, what do you think about all this? What, in terms of those questions, do you think there are issues in your mind, or are there other bigger deals that we need, other bigger kind of fights that we need to fight?
I'm all for the arts as being an artist. I know exactly that impact straight away, but I think also that same kind of feeling, first of all, like I got a band 3 in like drama in HSC, like it was really bad, but look at me now, I'm working with STC, it's great. But I 100% agree that I think it's all about that result and that standardized testing, whereas the arts doesn't see it that way, and they need that safe space to fail, where in maths you need that one answer, you can't fail, or you get it wrong and then you get shamed, and it's like, but it's kind of all the same. I mean, when has the government ever got it right? Like, that's my actual question. Like, when have they actually had something right? Like, I think my running joke at the reptile park is the only thing in 250 years of the government being here, the only thing they've done right is the fact that anti-venom is free for anyone who get bitten by a snake. Like, everyone laughs but like, it's like as an Aboriginal person, as a First Nation person, as an artist, as a gay man, like, when has the government actually done something right? And I feel like I'm scared to say that question out loud, but I'm actually trying to think, like, when has they done it right? Like, was it giving women the right to vote was way too late? Was it giving the First Nation people the right to vote? Was that the right way? But was that when has actually the government has done something right? And I think with the arts, and you ask, if Fletcher has done anything right, like how's he done, like, does this, but the person before, the minister before him, the minister before that, like, has they done anything right? Like, has there all been a lead up to this? Like, yeah.
I suppose there's never a total right, is there?
No.
I think you could argue that, the establishment of SBS by Malcolm Fraser was a pretty amazing thing to do. You could argue free university education for the moment that it lasted under Gough Whitlam was pretty... So you can see little bright spots here and there where something good... The NDIS, I mean, I know they're slaughtering it to death now, but it was, in its original inception, a really fantastic creative idea. So I think governments attempt to do things right, but often they don't reach their own, what they'd like to do. And we can blame the government, but we probably also have to blame ourselves. We vote for them.
I do want to highlight something that Fletcher, I think, did do good, and that is calling the Inquiry for the Arts, which and that was at the end of 2020, and then just last year they released their Bipartisan Sculpting a National Cultural Plan, a really long title, I can't remember the whole thing, makes 22 recommendations. A lot of them, there's something in all of those recommendations, and it's also quite a very long report. And what we as a sector got from that is that they listened to us, that the committee listened to us, and what we have been urging for this government and for the next one is that they pick up particularly the first recommendation of that report, which was to establish a national cultural plan, and to invest some time and consideration into listening to people, listening to artists, listening to organisations, listening to arts workers, and listening to audiences about what it is that's needed, and so that there is a consideration when there is money chucked at the arts, that it is put in a place that will have impact.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, and I just want each one of the panel to do two things. I want you to identify the bright spots that you can see out there. Like, what are the hopeful things that we can see? And secondly, what are you going to do next? Like, what's the thing that you want to do to make a difference to the profile of the arts? Is it going to more shows? Is it talking to politicians? What's the thing that you can leave us with for us to do to actually make a difference in this space? And then I'm going to call on Professor Robin Ewing to finish for the evening. So, Neville, bright spots. Can you see any?
Bright spot.
Apart from the Southern Cross, maybe.
Kind of what I feel kind of hopeful for is that this new way the way the arts is going, and this idea of storytelling. Like, everyone's been saying that, like, this idea of storytelling. And as a First Nation person, that makes me really proud because, like I've been saying, like, we've been doing this for thousands of years, and then that knowledge and that way of learning is actually finally creeping up, and that it wasn't seen as like, oh, Dream Dome stories is stories, and that it actually means something, which is kind of cool. So I feel very hopeful for that. And I guess the second part of that question is what I do is, like, I guess is what I do now is that I just keep teaching students the way I've been teaching them through First Nations, like, way of teachings, and then teach them about First Nations people within our knowledges, so then they remember. And at the park, I do the same thing when I go into schools, when I do universities, when I teach anywhere I go, even if I'm just yarning around the fire. Like, I had that same kind of mentality, and that's what I'm doing for the arts, is to keep that burning.
Fabulous. Laura?
Oh, hi.
I know, I'm going to jump
Okay. In a similar way, I'm very passionate about educating young people and inspiring them to think outside the box with, creativity in all sorts of disciplines, not just art. So I'll keep doing work in that space. And for me personally, we haven't really mentioned the pandemic's impact on the art, but for me, I've only just worked on my first collaborative projects in almost 2 years. And nothing nourishes me more than being with people making art and seeing the impact that it has on audiences. Nothing gives me more of a feeling of hope and possibility than creating something new for people to experience. So I'll just keep chugging away at that.
Yeah.
And hope
Great.
I connect with people.
Really hope you do, because the work is extraordinary. Penelope?
Yes, hopeful for lots of things. In the immediate future, I will be spending the next several weeks meeting with various candidates and talking them through our election policy priorities, which we have 5 of those. Put First Nations first. I should know these off by heart. Stimulate long-term sustainability. Pay artists for their work. Prioritise equity, cultural safety and accessibility, and nourish arts education. There are 5 policy priorities. At the moment, we have a pledge for anybody to make a pledge that they will consider candidates' election platforms in relation to their arts commitments towards the election, and we are articulating or using those to illustrate how much people care about the arts. We've only launched it less than 2 weeks ago, and we've had 500 people make that pledge already. You can do that by going to our website and looking for Vote for Art.
Great. Jane?
Well, I'm going to try and change the bloody government, that's for sure. But I think what gives me hope is actually the anger of women. That's what gives me hope. I see a direct line between the 100,000 women that marched all around Australia just over a year ago and the rise of the independents, like Janine. And I'm standing for a small party because you have to in the Senate. If you're going to get above the line, you can't be just an individual. You have to be a registered party with 1,500 members. So I'm standing for Reason Australia. But it was that anger that motivated me. And I think that's where the hope is lying, that in fact there's a disruption happening, and it's being led by women who are saying the old way we've been doing things, the cis, straight, white men ruling the world thing, it just ain't working. Like, the whole thing's falling apart. And the only option it seems our current rulers have is denial. That they've just gone deeply into denial because they have no answers.
That's what men do best. That's what we do best. Sorry.
You may well say that. I couldn't possibly comment. But so my hope is in the fury of women, and actually one of the things I would like to say to the arts community, to all communities actually, is get in touch with your anger, because anger is energising, and women have played nice for 2,000 years, got us absolutely nowhere. So look at our example, change. Playing nice doesn't work. I think the arts have to get loud and noisy and start, being difficult. I think that's how you get attention paid. Being nice, they just keep throwing you a bit of money. Little sop here, little sop there. Good, we've got the arts quiet. Let's move on. We've got to stop doing that.
Diya, you get to get the last word.
I think the bright spots are these spotlights on this stage. You don't have to look very far. I think the fact that we do have, despite cutting funding and despite not getting the whole of Australia on board, the fact that we still have stages and platforms for young people to tell their stories, and the fact that we're still investing and making stories for young people. Sometimes we forget to do that, right? The fact that we still have that is the bright spot.
Yeah.
And to keep supporting, I'm going to keep dragging my friends to theatre shows, and I'm going to keep trying to be in them and talking to my friends about it as well.
Thank you, Diya. I want to thank all of you. Robin's going to do a proper thanks. Thank you so much for giving us so much insight.
Well, I just want to echo Michael's thanks to ATYP for sharing in this event. And my thanks to all of you, as well as the wonderful spotlights that our panel have provided for us. Michael, I'm glad you ended on hope, because we have to be hopeful. people. But I'm glad that Jane has reminded us that there is righteous anger about what's happening at the moment. And I think we all have a responsibility, one, to educate everyone that we know about the importance of the arts for who we are and for so many other things as well, our health, our well-being, but for all the other wonderful things that the arts enables us to do. But second, that we have a responsibility to write to our local members, as Penelope said, to make noise about what's happening, because as Diya said, we want the opportunity for young people, every child, to have quality arts processes and experiences at the centre of their education. And that's not going to happen if we don't make that noise. So thank you all so much for coming, and please keep in touch with Create, and let's help change what's happening in Australia at the moment.